The Senate floor runs red with blood. Julius Caesar, Rome's greatest general, gasps his final breath as 23 daggers find their mark. Among his killers stands Marcus Brutus, the man Caesar raised like his own son, twisting steel between his ribs. Within hours, Rome exploded. Not in celebration, in pure, murderous rage. Veterans and families whose debts he'd forgiven scream for blood. The conspirators fled for their lives from the very people they claimed to be saving, because Caesar had achieved something that terrified the elite. He had proven that a leader could become more beloved than Rome itself. This is how he did it. Young Caesar grew up in the Subura around 85 BCE, a crowded neighborhood where he heard shopkeepers argue in three languages: Latin, Greek, and the Celtic of Gallic slaves, whose labor was undercutting Roman workers. The baker whose business failed because senator-owned slave estates flooded the market with cheap grain. The veteran whose service meant nothing when debt collectors came. Caesar's legendary memory began here. While other young patricians studied philosophy, Caesar was learning something more dangerous: how power actually worked when you stripped away the pretty speeches. When Caesar left for military service, he carried this understanding with him. Other officers kept their distance from common soldiers, eating separately, sleeping in comfort while their men shivered in the cold. Caesar ate their food, shared their dangers, remembered not just their names but their villages, their fathers' trades, their hopes for the future. They noticed, and they never forgot. Follow Gaius Scribonius through Caesar's Gallic campaigns. A farmer's son from Latium whose family lost everything when senator-owned slave estates flooded the market with cheap grain. His father, a veteran who'd bled for Rome in 3 campaigns, watched helplessly as debt collectors, backed by the same senators who'd profited from his wars, seized the farm that had been in his family for generations. Gaius joined the legions not for glory, but because it was either that or starve in Rome's slums. He'd served under other generals, aristocrats who saw soldiers as tools to be used up and discarded, who watched battles from safe hills while ordering attacks they'd never lead themselves. Caesar was different. At the Sabes River in 57 BCE, when the Belgae caught the Romans by surprise, Gaius watched his general grab a shield from a dead soldier and sprint toward the collapsing 10th Legion. Not to give orders from behind, to fight in the front rank, taking spear thrusts meant for his men, a patrician's blood mixing with common soldiers on the muddy ground. That image burned into Gaius's memory. After 8 years in Gaul, Gaius owned fertile land bought with his share of spoils. His debts were paid, his children could afford education, his wife wore jewelry instead of rags. But more than wealth, Caesar had given him something no Roman general had ever offered a common soldier: respect, dignity, the feeling that his life mattered to someone in power. When word reached the legions that Rome's elite were demanding Caesar return defenseless to face justice from his enemies, the veterans' reaction was immediate and unanimous. The same senators who'd stolen their fathers' farms, who'd grown rich off their blood, now wanted to destroy the one man who'd actually served them faithfully. It was war. At 51, Caesar stands at the Rubicon's dark waters in January 49 BCE with a single legion, reading Rome's final ultimatum. Behind him lies safety, his governorship, legal immunity. Ahead lies either triumph or death at the hands of men who'd grown fat on the system he'd served. Around him wait veterans who followed him through 8 years of hell. These aren't career soldiers anymore. They're stakeholders in Caesar's success, men whose prosperity depends on his survival. The same senators demanding Caesar's surrender had grown rich off wars these men had fought, then stolen their fathers' farms while they bled in foreign lands. A centurion spits in the river's dark water. Others grip their weapons tighter, watch their champion destroyed by corrupt aristocrats, or cross that water and fight for everything they'd built together. The die is cast, Caesar declares, spurring his horse into the current. Behind him, thousands of veterans wade into the dark water, their torches reflecting off wet steel as they follow their general toward Rome. When Caesar's army approached Rome, something unprecedented happened. The gates opened, not because citizens cowered in terror, but because they'd been waiting for this moment. Veterans who'd served under him lined the roads, cheering. Shopkeepers who'd heard of his fairness to common soldiers brought out their families. In the forum, Caesar walked among the crowd, touching hands, looking ordinary Romans in the eye as he spoke about land for veterans, debt relief for struggling families, grain subsidies so no Roman child would starve. Titus Pullo, a metalworker whose shop was failing under crushing debt, watched Caesar's eyes find his as he spoke about protecting honest Romans from moneylenders. Pullo's family was 3 days from losing everything: the shop his grandfather built, the home where his children were born. As civil war erupted and Caesar seized Rome's treasury, he immediately began implementing reforms. Land redistribution gave veterans real property. Debt relief prevented families from losing everything to creditors. Public works employed thousands of Romans at fair wages. In the marble halls of the Palatine, Rome's aristocrats watched Caesar's popularity with growing terror. If one leader could gain supreme power by actually serving ordinary people, what would stop others from trying the same approach? The comfortable world where aristocrats inherited power, regardless of merit, would vanish forever. They faced a choice that has confronted elites throughout history: adapt to a new reality where leaders must actually serve the people, or destroy the threat before it spreads. They chose destruction. Among those wrestling with this choice was Marcus Brutus, a man torn between personal loyalty and what he'd been taught was honor. Caesar had pardoned him after civil war, elevated him to high office, treated him with the affection of a father for a beloved son. But in his study, surrounded by marble busts of ancestors who died defending republican principles, Brutus felt the weight of 5 centuries of family expectation. His ancestor had founded the Republic by killing the last king, as Caesar accumulated honors that violated everything Romans held sacred. His face on coins like a living god, a month renamed in his honor, the title of dictator for life when Rome had banned kings for 5 centuries. Brutus made his choice. To Romans, these weren't political statements. They were acts of blasphemy against the republic their ancestors had died to create. The man who'd become more beloved than Rome itself had convinced himself he'd become more necessary than Rome's institutions. The conspiracy that formed around him included 60 senators from diverse backgrounds, but they shared one fatal miscalculation. They assumed ordinary Romans would thank them for murdering Caesar. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, as Caesar entered Pompey's theater for a Senate meeting, the conspirators struck. 23 blades found their mark. Caesar's eyes found Brutus among his killers, and in that moment of recognition, the beloved son among his murderers, something deeper than flesh was torn apart. Et tu, Brute? And you, Brutus? The man who'd become more beloved than any Roman in history died at the feet of Pompey's statue, betrayed by men he'd trusted, killed in the name of principles that meant nothing to the people he'd actually served. The conspirators expected grateful citizens celebrating their liberation from tyranny. Instead, when news of the assassination reached the streets, Rome exploded. Veterans who'd fought for Caesar, families whose children ate because of his grain distributions, debtors whose homes he'd saved, they poured into the forum like a flood of pure rage. Mark Antony seized the moment. At Caesar's funeral, he read Caesar's will aloud: gardens left to the people of Rome, money for every citizen. Then he held up Caesar's bloody toga, each rent in the fabric telling its own story of betrayal. What followed consumed Rome for days. Mobs burned the houses of conspirators, hunted down anyone associated with the plot. The conspirators fled Rome in terror, many never to return. The assassination achieved exactly what the conspirators had hoped to prevent: the permanent death of the Roman Republic. Caesar's murder didn't restore republican government. It created a power vacuum filled through violence. Years of civil war followed. When Augustus emerged victorious, he learned from Caesar's mistake. He kept republican forms while emptying them of meaning. Elections still occurred, but he determined the candidates. The bitter irony was complete. By murdering Caesar to prevent monarchy, the elite had created the imperial system they feared. The republic they thought they were saving was destroyed forever. Caesar became Rome's most beloved leader by doing something revolutionary, actually serving the people who supported him. His story reveals a pattern that echoes through history. When traditional institutions fail ordinary people, they create space for leaders who will serve them instead. His assassination proved that genuine popular loyalty can be more powerful than institutional authority and more dangerous to those who mistake their positions for permanent power. The question his legacy poses remains urgent. Can political systems adapt to serve ordinary people's interests, or will they choose destruction over change?